Hey everybody, this is Dan Alexander. You're watching the artist Grapevine, and today my guest is Bob East. He's a local caricature artist from Indianapolis. He also does caricatures. He does animation, and he's also a comedian. Thanks for being on the show today.
Yeah,
Good to see you.
excited about this. It's gonna be fun.
Nice, nice. We're here in your studio. It's really nice. You've got all kinds of original artwork on the wall. Man, this is I feel right at home right here.
A lot of distractions in here. A lot of just, collectible.
But every artist kind of needs that, don't they?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just like artist studio is the artist man cave, so to speak.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's just kind of doubles as that. It's like every little bit of childhood nerd memorabilia.
My wife claims it's a man cave, but really it's my studio since I produce work here. So.
As long as you can get some work done, you can kind of put that stamp of studio on it.
Yes.
So I have one as well. So. Yeah. Mine's not nearly as organized as yours, though. So.
Well, I don't know. It's
Yeah. But okay, well, we're gonna get on with the interview here. Great studio, by the way. As a kid, where did you see yourself going with art?
Man, I don't know. As a kid, I was really into like the Hulk and Marvel, like we all were. I think you were too, probably. And I was reading a lot of comic books, a lot of Hulk comics, but I was also watching a lot of Bugs Bunny, and I knew it was one of those things. I always kind of want to be a comic book artist, but I think I veered more towards Bugs Bunny. And the Hanna-Barbera cartoons always made me laugh. So I kind of went more down, as a kid, I thought, man, I want to grow up and make Bugs Bunny cartoons.
So who was your favorite animator? See, mine was Chuck Jones. I always liked Chuck.
Yeah, I mean, as a kid, you kind of go with the ones that, because as a kid you don't really know who's who. Right. I mean, other than you'll see Chuck Jones or
those were always the ones that seemed to make me laugh. And then I was like, and I would sit there and I always saw Chuck Jones' name. So I was like,
I was always a Bob Clampett guy from an early age, and then I would discover this. Oh well, guys like Rod Scribner who worked for him were doing a lot of the really fun animations that Clampett was directing. And obviously, I mean, everybody loved Chuck Jones, and then Friz Freleng. They all had their different styles. But as a kid, you don't know a lot of the guys, and as you grow up, you start seeing some of those. Like, oh, this guy's awesome, and that guy's awesome. So, I kind of saw myself as a guy who would make comics in some form, either comic strip like Bugs Bunny type funny comics or animation. When I was very young, I looked up an encyclopedia about animation, and it showed the whole process of animation. I think I was like 6 or 7. So at an early age, I kind of ruined myself on how animation, the magic of animation is, because people watch animation, they're like, wow. But then as soon as you see it's like, sequential drawings, like, okay, now I know how the magic is done. So still able to enjoy cartoons, but that was something that I kind of thought I was going to go into and hoped to go into.
Now, you and I are both caricature artists, and we work gigs together.
Yep.
When you became a caricature artist, when did you realize like you could actually make some sort of a living at it? Now, are you a full-time freelancer, or do you just do this part-time?
I am a full-time jack of trades, but all those trades are kind of connected.
Yeah.
So it's not like I'm doing this and yard work and building houses.
So you're all very much
connected,
multifaceted, but all your creative endeavors kind of all funnel into one income.
Yeah, but I try to make sure that those things are all within the realm of what my core goal is. So I started out and I went to school for graphic design because, I didn't investigate enough or didn't know anything about where you would go to study, animation.
I think graphic design is kind of like the good entryway door for, like, if you wanted to go to university, or to a university and you wanted to study art, that was always like the go-to for like, hey, I want to make a career out of this.
I
And
think
that-
it's
it seemed like it was like the most feasible.
I think it's the one that people are like, yeah, you can get a job doing that.
Yeah.
But also, I think there's, where, and I think I was just not very smart because I didn't talk to any counselors or anything. But you think about like working in animation or something or comic books, and you think, oh, how does that work? Do I just send them stuff? I didn't know there was a Joe Kubert school. I was too stupid to look for that. Or Cal Arts. I didn't even think about Cal Arts or any of that stuff. Not that I would have gotten in. So I went to graphic design, and then I worked as a graphic designer for,
See, I went to Cubert's after I did my undergrad.
yeah.
So that was like, I kind of did everything in reverse.
Yeah.
I do everything in reverse, it seems like. That's terrible. And but it
It's
also
hard to- it works out.
it all works.
I worked, and I worked in design for like less than a year before I knew that this is something that I wanted. I knew I wanted to do animation. I was like, I want to do animation. That's what I want to do. Just 6 months into that, and I ended up working in design for 10 years while studying animation and trying to break down that door without going to school. And I got pretty far. I was able to work on a lot of stuff, but so I don't know, what was the question? I'm getting off topic.
Basically just animation and
So-
like how all your creative endeavors kind of funnel into
so
one thing.
graphic design paid the bills, and then I was trying, I was doing some animation stuff. I worked on
And you're married with kids at this time.
I'm married with a child at
Yeah.
that time. Yeah, 90. Yeah, and I would I had kids later, but so I worked on an SNL Funhouse thing and some little pieces of Cartoon Network, just little, like you'd get like here in Indiana you'd get table scraps. Everything would funnel down and you get a little cleanup work or something, and then lo and behold, about I don't know what year, sometime in the 90s, Canada started subsidizing animation, so all that kind of subsidiary low-level work just disappeared and was sent to Canada. And at that point, I'm like, well, that kind of stinks. So I was working at the advertising for Marsh, and they were looking for caricature people. And when they told me how much they were paying these guys, I just was like, hey, I can do that.
Right.
Which was just a bold-faced lie.
And
but I knew I could draw,
Yeah.
so I'm like, well, how's it going to be?
And that leads me into my next question. What was your first caricature gig like?
That was it. And what was funny was, they were looking for people, and you're going to pay me my whole week's salary in one day to draw on a Saturday for 8 hours. I'm like, well, of course I'm going to do that. So I went and grabbed all my Mad magazines like everybody did, and just started copying some Mort Drucker, and I started messaging people, and I messaged Tom Richmond, and didn't know him at all at the time, and he answered some questions. But my first gig was this employee picnic for the company that I worked for, actually. So double dipping, I guess. But
Yeah.
so it was a 2-day gig, and it was 8 hours on Saturday and 6 hours on Sunday. And if anybody knows anything about doing gigs for caricatures, those are rather long shifts. I mean, a standard caricature gig is probably 2 to 4 hours. 5 hours is a long gig. 6 hours long gig. 8 is a really long gig, and you love to get those because it's good money. So. Yeah, and it was me and my friend Daryl Pyle, who I had known, actually. I had met Daryl in animation because he worked at Perennial, and I worked there briefly with Daryl, and I was doing some stuff with him animation-wise. And he had done, I think Daryl had done one other gig, and so one, and I had done 0.
What's the longest you've ever done a caricature gig for? Mine was always at the park. When we did
longest what?
At the fun park was 11 hours. What was your longest gig?
Are you talking about prepaid or being in a park?
Just any gig that you just sat down and you planted your butt, and then that you didn't get up until
probably 12 or so, 11 or 12.
Yeah.
Probably in par with you, but it's a theme park is a little different because I don't know that it's busy the whole time. I remember being there for 12 hours, but not being
drawing
busy the whole
minute.
time. So, the longest, So the first gig was actually one of the longest gigs I've ever had, and so. It was kind of a baptism by fire because I literally, everything that you could imagine, we've been doing caricatures now for how long? 20 some years,
Yeah,
both
like
of
that.
us. So everything that we've experienced in those 20 years, I experienced in that one day.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I had the crazy line and the heat and the grouchy customers and the hecklers and everything that you've experienced over the years in caricature. I think
you had that all in one day.
All in one day. It was almost like,
Nice.
okay, well, I've been through else.
Awesome.
And I had I had some lady that, I was drawing, and, she looks at me all mad and just says, "Hey, man, why'd you make my lips so big?" Just angry looking.
Oh,
and I was just like, white as a ghost. And then she just cracked up laughing because she was messing with me. But it was like, for a minute there, I was like, whoa, what did I do?
There's always caricatures. Yeah. Caricatures,
right?
When you're doing caricature gigs,
yeah,
there's always a customer at some point, and you're asked to draw something you've never drawn before.
Yeah.
And you've always had it doesn't happen every time you have a gig, but
yeah.
I'd say once a year I get something that I get a curveball thrown to me.
Oh,
and
right, yeah.
And I always say caricature, there's a fine line between exaggeration and insult. And you have to straddle that line to make sure, because those are paying customers.
Sure.
You don't want to upset anybody.
Right.
You want everybody to go away happy.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not working for Mad Magazine where it's okay to embellish some of the imperfections of the subjects.
Yeah, and it depends. It also depends on where you're working. But yeah, my first gig was that first 8-hour gig, and also probably one of the longest. I think the longest gig I ever had is we did Future Farmers of America,
mm-hmm.
and that was a 3-day show, and it was 8, and 6 hours. Good money, but when you've got a Future Farmers of America and it's all these teenage kids, and you've got a line for 8 hours, it's nonstop. And we, we drew, it was me and Daryl, and I think just me and Daryl, and we drew so many people. And we actually ran out of paper because we were drawing fast, and that's how you get fast. And this is a few years into it. So and Daryl's one of the fastest I've ever seen, but we're drawing so fast that we literally ran out of paper, and we had like 2 hours left. So kids were going around to other booths and getting like information sheets with blank backsides and bringing them. We draw them on the back of that.
Nice.
So we drew a lot, and so that, I think that first gig was just like,
you had a captive audience.
Yeah.
That was really cool. So nice. So when you're doing all of these juggling, wearing all these hats, you also have time to do comedy?
Yeah, comedy's one of those things. Yeah, stand-up comedy, if you call it that. I'm okay. I'm not great, but that originated from, it all goes, like, I think everything is related. It's all going back to illustration and cartoons and comedy, comics. I on and off work on a comic strip, and so I thought, well, I'm writing these comic strips, and I want to get better at writing comic strips. So how do I do that? Well, I'll try doing some comedy, doing some like stand-up comedy or something, and hopefully that will help improve my joke writing for a comic strip. So I didn't really know. I'm pretty oblivious to the world. If I was any kind of aware, I'd just be like, oh, there's open mics you can go to. Yeah. But my brain didn't calculate that there was open mics, even though I had literally worked. I did animation on a film called Open Micers about open mic comics, and I'm still too oblivious to think that I could just go to an open mic because I don't think that way. So I signed up for an improv class, close as I could get, and that actually helped me a lot with communicating with people, because improv is all about that. And once I was there, I kind of got connected with the comedy scene. Then I went to my first open mic. I'd only done improv for about 3 weeks before I figured out there was open mics. So I started going to open mics and still did improv. And I've been on open mics for about 5 years, and I've been on a few shows. But I've kind of reached my goal in that I still like going to do comedy, but my ultimate goal was the ability to write jokes. And I figured out that the joke structure of writing of telling a joke is very similar to the structure of a 1 to 3 panel comic. You've got the one-liner guys, the one-liners. That's like a 1 panel comic, and then with the other jokes, you've got to set up and structure and a punchline. Boom, boom, boom. That's your 3-panel comic. So
Right.
I ended up like being able to write a lot of jokes, and then I would also like switch back and forth. So I would take a joke that I had written into my Mike the Otter comic strip, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna try that on the stage. So all I had to do was like describe the first panel to the people, and then do the punchline. Or I would take a joke that I had written on stage, like, you know what, maybe I can use that in my comic, and I would draw it out. So that's the origin of stand-up comedy. And again, it's I'm not trying to go out there and be, you know, a world famous comic. It's just
all these things.
It's all connected.
It all
it's
connects.
all connected in a way, and people don't. People, you know, they're like, oh, you're doing too many things, but I'm not. It's all connected to a central point.
Right.
Like even with filmmaking,
It all feeds the creativity.
It all feeds that same source of yeah. You're right. It's all that same.
I agree. I mean, I started playing an musical instrument, going to open mics, and it was because I would get burnt out doing art, or I would just kind of get.
Yes.
I needed another creative outlet so I could take a break,
Yeah.
rest the muscles, and get the fatigue of that one area, that one medium out, and then I could concentrate another. And then when I go back, it was like going back with being all refreshed.
Yeah. I used to, I kind of did that. You obviously have achieved more in that world than I have, because I was doing illustration work for a guitar company, and I ended up just like trading out for a guitar for part of it because I wanted that same kind of outlet. So I would keep a guitar next to me, and I would draw, and I would pick the guitar. But it was one of those things that like I took lessons. I just cannot play guitar. I can play. I have more guitars than songs I can play.
I felt the same way.
I mean,
it was just practice, and then it was basically just forcing yourself up in front of people,
right?
And then just doing it over and over and over again.
Right.
Until
Well,
you
for
get
me it was the practice time, because it wasn't as related to what I was doing as is for you. Like for me, it's easy for me to say go do comedy or do work on a feature like a horror live action or whatever, because that's so related. It's like, oh, I'm gonna do stand up. I was just gonna be working on jokes for my comic. But for me, playing guitar is like, I don't know how this applies to me being an illustrator. It doesn't. So I had a tough time. The key to me not being able to play was just I didn't have time to practice, because I would always be like, okay, you know what, this is fun, but I need to draw. So I got like 7 guitars, and I can play like 6 notes or something. It's